Jeez, damn it, Morty, who taught you to fly this thing?
Rick and Morty shows no sign of slowing down anytime soon, even though it's faced its share of hurdles over the years. With 7 seasons already behind us and an 8th on the way, there's still much to discover about both the primary and secondary characters. The series showcases a mind-blowing range of personalities that reflect the clever writing at its core. We encounter everything from satirical takes on real-world figures to playful commentaries on meta elements in storytelling itself, an entirely new level of meta. And yeah, we may have skipped a few characters like those from the Gear Wars, whose stories deserve a dedicated feature of their own. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel now. This is a small click for you, but for us, well, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
No one's escaped that place before.
Really learned your lesson about chasing this guy. Hey, man.
Evil Morty, introduced quite a few seasons back, along with the tune of For the Damaged Coder, Evil Morty has now become a rather important part of the series. Anytime that you hear that music, the first thing that comes to your mind is Evil Morty planning something sinister that he'll forever change the Rickverse as we know it. Picking on the very idea that Mortys are considered stupid, this kid managed to fool an entire multiverse and pulled the strings to end up being one of the most calculated characters in the series. Every time we wonder whether he's managed to stray away from the path of our Rick and Morty, he somehow ends up tagging into the storyline. But the very idea that we call him Evil Morty doesn't mean that he's entirely foolish. He's the same character who opposes every single stereotype that's been set for a Morty-like character in the series. It's an intelligent curveball to the general flow of events, and that's why each time we witness a comeback from Evil Morty, we're assured that there's a larger enemy at bay, or something bigger is supposed to happen. The last time he tagged along with Rick was during Rick's hunt for Rick Prime, and here, Evil Morty ended up helping Rick kill the very version of him that had put Rick through this circle of misery.
Fun to leave that race behind. Thought we'd end up winning it by accident. No! Chicken coop cluster!
Rick Sanchez. Rick seems like the perfect sci-fi character, a man who has unlimited knowledge and is probably an android of himself, based on the years of battling intergalactic evils. Rick's pretty genuine compared to the other characters, and he won't think twice before he utters the worst possible word at the worst possible time. But the very fact that he has a seemingly impossible amount of knowledge doesn't mean that he has answers for everything. Even though he's subjected to a tragic past, the very past that made him the Rick that we know, he's someone coping with a continuous loss while dealing with the surge of responsibilities that keep piling up on him. Even though he doesn't let others witness his vulnerable side, he does manage to go through a zigzag path between the chaos and the love that he has for his family. Plus, you can't deny that the man is a pure cinephile, someone who manages to show his love of movies through interesting creations inspired by your favorite films. He also tries to keep himself relevant by staying up to date on the latest pop culture events and manages to dabble in a short-lived interest in the political climate of the world. I'm sure that he has some sort of mechanism that allows him to just download the latest updates and thus stay relevant. Lucky for Morty, Rick does have the best stories to tell with his years of experience across the galaxy, and Morty doesn't just have to hear them. Sometimes he gets to live those narratives in various ways.
We learned our lesson, now let us out!
If that was gonna work, we would have been ejected by now!
Morty Smith. You think Rick is enough for the animated series, which has a plot primarily surrounding the various misadventures across the galaxy. But Morty is the very heart of the series, in a manner that might just be a major judgment of us viewers in the show. See, if Superman's identity as Clark Kent is the very idea of an average human being to him, Morty is all of us viewers, completely befuddled by the crazy nature of the universe, and at the same time trying to cope with the drastic chaos that surrounds it. Even though Rick is the most intelligent person in the world, there's no denying that Morty's presence next to him is a huge aspect that makes that identity work. Not because a fool standing next to an average person makes the average person an intelligent being, but because Morty is the only one who has a better understanding of Rick than sometimes Rick himself. The science might blind Rick, and that's where Morty steps in and solves the stories. Over the years, that boy has developed some intelligence that's made him way better than the genes he acquired from his father's side. Not that Jerry's insignificant, but it's good that Rick was there to help the kid out.
Dad, I think maybe you were right on this one.
Beth, that's not how it works. You gotta press...
Beth Smith. Beth is Rick's daughter, and that comes out in every sense as we dive deeper into the arc of the series, wherein she has to face the hard choices with Rick settling in with a family, and some choices make one wonder what she might go for. But as a larger character, we do see the sadness that surrounds her ordinary life as a horse surgeon, a job that Dan Harmon must have completely improvised for the character as a joke, with a husband who feels like a failure to be around. But we do get to see her make choices that completely change the way her family functions, and then live with them, whether it was separation separating from Jerry for a while or deciding to take her life into a whirlwind of crazy adventures that her father managed to put her through. Even though she appears calm on the surface level, it's the elements of her past that make for an interesting gateway into the idea that she could have been a complete psychopath all along. In fact, she might as well be a psychopath with severe tendencies that grow from the fact that she has a full devotion to her father. Her journey has elements of betrayal, identity, and agency spread throughout.
It is. Oh, cool.
Space Beth. If Beth is someone who ended up choosing her family over everything else, Space Beth is the version who decided to leave her family and become something that she must have felt her father would be proud of, a spacefaring rebel. It's interesting how there's a 50-50 chance of either her or Beth being the original while the other is a clone. Only Rick knows that, and I think they're going to keep that a secret for a while, because we're all doing well with the idea that both of them could be the real Beth. While Beth tries to adapt to the circumstances her family forces her to endure, Space Beth is the idea of rebellion and has no hint of someone who domesticated herself. Space Beth's existence actually makes it feel as if Beth would have left, because she does end up falling in love with her. And at the same time, Space Beth fell for the idea that the other Beth sacrificed the vast possibilities and stood with her family. In a series where Beth could have been a typical mother figure, Space Beth stands as the idea of Beth who manifests everything that Beth would have originally feared and rejected.
Whose name? Christopher James Motorola. Charge it first.
Summer Smith. If Morty's someone who tries to cope with the vast world that Rick brings him across, Summer is someone who's had a rather volatile reaction to all of it. The idea that Morty's adventures overshadow her arc is something that's made very clear, and even though she could have ended up being something like Meg from Family Guy, she strays away from that path and manages to bring about a distinct persona that hits the mark pretty well. She was initially brought in as a supporting character, but over time, she managed to carve out her own space, sometimes being too annoying for Morty, who thought that he was the star of the show. Now, Rick does have a bond with her, wherein he decides to bring her along for his adventures, sometimes to bully Morty, and other times because Summer has a completely different way of looking at things. But Summer does indicate that she's trying to walk away from this life, and there is a chance that she'll do that. Being around Rick, she's gained a significant maturity that'll help her lead a peaceful life away from all of this. In the absolute chaos that's become their family, the sibling bond that Morty and Summer share becomes a space where they can keep secrets and save their family.
And loving it.
Oh my god, is that Rick Sanchez?
Bird person. Knowing Rick, it's hard to imagine that someone would manage to become one of his closest friends. Close enough that Rick decided to resurrect him from the dead. The two share a very special bond throughout their years of working together and fighting many battles. In fact, the very first time that we met Bird person, he was able to translate those very words that Rick used to throw around casually. Wubba lubba dub dub. It meant, "I am in great pain. Please help me." Even though Rick won't easily get into sharing his bonds, the fact that there has been someone in front of whom Rick has been vulnerable, someone who has the most obscure name that sounds like a rejected DC superhero, means that Bird person isn't just a side character. Rick had to convince Bird person to come back to life by telling him about his daughter, and we did get to see him trying to cope with her and the fact that her mother was the very person who cost him his life, along with his other friends. Considering both Rick and Bird person are in the same league and very outspoken, Bird person manages to answer to everything that Rick holds within himself.
That's okay. I'm Mr. Meeseeks. Look at me.
Mr. Meeseeks. Rick introduced the Meeseeks element, and it felt like a complete joke at first. We were tagging along in the journey to see where this character was going, only to find later that this bizarre character is more like an existential study on anguish. Initially, Mr. Meeseeks are supposed to be beings who are momentarily created to serve a particular purpose, and they do get assigned a purpose. But the moment they fail to fulfill that purpose, they become desperate. Things go absolutely crazy. While things can get a lot darker when Mr. Meeseeks isn't able to fulfill their purpose, one can never forget that there's something even darker about the idea that they go poof once the task is fulfilled. Mr. Meeseeks is continuously dying, going through the cycle of finding a purpose, then fulfilling it, and then dying, only to be brought back to serve another purpose. If you still haven't grasped the dark aspect of this type of life, you must remember how much you hated the concept of the Expendables from Bong Joon-ho's Mickey 17, and how that caused an uprising that led to them being banned. Luckily, the tone of the cartoon has a strong humorous bond that prevents it from becoming entirely dark. Squanchy. We can almost believe that each of Rick's friends is basically some heightened version of a particular aspect of Rick's persona. If Bird Person is the more emotional element about him, then Squanchy, in a rather crazy manner, represents the idea of reckless abandon. But this abandonment isn't without the idea of a ferocious loyalty dedicated to Rick, because he almost sacrificed himself when Tammy and the Federation agents tried to apprehend Rick and his friends. First time we got to see Squanchy, there was a lot that needed explanation, and there was no reason to take the character seriously. But in the end, the character was indeed someone who had fought various intergalactic battles next to Rick and Bird Person. He was also the one who enjoyed talking about their older days, and also he was indeed in a band with the two. So beneath that crude name that might as well mean anything you can think of, Squanchy has a depth that will probably end up being explored at some point in the future of the series.
Mr. Poopybutthole.
Well, what do you know about this? You're not in any of mine.
Mr. Poopybutthole. Mr. Poopybutthole is probably the craziest creation ever, randomly introduced in an episode dedicated to the idea of random character additions. Yeah, we were tested a lot when we were made to believe that Mr. Poopybutthole was real at a time when even Pencil Vestra or Twinkles were aliens disguised as random memories of characters. He'd been there all along, and he'd become quite close to the family, and even Rick, considering Beth managed to shoot him down. But this random guy has a lot more story to him than any other character, because it's almost as if he has an arc explored in a matter of seconds in the series from time to time, and those few seconds are enough to hook us into his life completely. If you thought Rick broke the fourth wall, then you should see Mr. Poopybutthole and how he simply uses the fourth wall as a tool, indulging us in the absurdity of the multiverse's duplicity. The last time we saw him, he was definitely going through an episode of manic psychosis, and we'll continue to wait for the day he makes a solid comeback into the series.
And that's when Malachi the Squid King rips off his face, and beneath it,
Jerry Smith. Hey, yeah, I know it's weird that we went with Jerry after the likes of Mr. Poopybutthole and even Squanchy, but Jerry is the most Meg-like character from the entire series. It became clear to me that this guy is a complete loser when I first heard the wind blowing near him, making the sound of a loser. And I didn't think once that it was some trick that Rick might have been playing. Average, fragile, and yet one of the most essential characters in the series. Jerry is someone who manages to tie the family together and gives us the most bizarre narratives. The fact that Beth would choose Rick over Jerry any day is what makes him sad, but the fact he got back with the family is really why they managed to function properly. His conflict with Rick might be the result of being occasionally proven a failure, but it's right under the stress of being a caricature that Jerry ends up being the one who has a strong resolve and surprising relatability. If you think Jerry doesn't matter, then you definitely should check out the episodes where he carries the story, because it's in these episodes that we see he does have his own world going on. Doofus Rick. Following Jerry with Doofus Rick actually makes sense because the two ended up bonding quite well, and for a second there, it felt like Jerry had managed to find someone in his league. But Doofus Rick is the least Rick of all Ricks. Yes, somehow he's the most humane of them all. In the wide variety of Ricks that we've seen across the multiverse, the most common characteristic they've shared is the abrasive and harsh tone, particularly toward Jerry. But Doofus appeared and showed his warmth and empathy, formed a genuine bond, and in turn got bullied by the other Ricks. Initially, it did feel like something must be off about the character, and the fact that everyone bullied him by saying that he eats his feces made it seem plausible. Thankfully, the creators of the series have stated it isn't really true, and thus Doofus ended up being a heightened take on the idea that Jerry and Rick do have a bond that Rick doesn't like exploring, unless the circumstances allow us to know that. Snuffles. Snuffles, originally Snowball, ended up being evidence of one of the most random events in the series, while showing how wrong depending on Rick the tech could go. Jerry, who's been proven to lack some intelligence himself, ended up demanding that Snuffles be given boosted intelligence for his poor behavior. When Rick complies, an error leads to Snuffles becoming hyper-intelligent and thus sparking the revolution of the dogs. While most of the people in the Smith family get the hate, Morty, because of his caring attitude towards Snuffles, gets spared. Like most of the random characters who have a larger role to play in this series, Snuffles is very clear about his name. According to him, he should be called Snowball, because Snuffles is a slave name. Things go a lot like a Planet of the Apes scenario, and Jerry faces the most hostility due to his behavior towards Snuffles before he became super intelligent. After managing to enslave humanity for a while, Snuffles' final resolve comes to the conclusion that they should leave Earth entirely, a place where they'd had a history of being enslaved. There's no mention of him after that, but we're sure that there's a planet somewhere across the multiverse where Snuffles rules and goes against everything humans would do to them. Krombopulus Michael. It's not a regular run if we're not introduced to a cool character who's been a friend of Rick, and in this case, it's the Gromflemite assassin by the name of Krombopulus Michael. Only Rick and Morty can perfectly nail the idea of an assassin who's absolutely chill and shows no hints of malice while being one of the most notorious killers. This insectoid alien with his chitinous exoskeleton and neat suit might just be one of the best iconic characters that the series had to offer. I call him notorious because he'll kill anyone, from a child to even animals. There's no conscience coming through. In his own words, "I have no code of ethics." With the first interaction, you might feel like you've come across a really cool guy. But then there's the entire moral aspect, where it'll completely change your perspective. Going back to the idea that Morty is basically us, Morty had a complete change in perspective, and he panicked and killed Krombopulus Michael. The universe lost an assassin who was an absolute gentleman and somehow perfectly held a line between a businessman and a gentleman, the business being killing people. It's bizarre how Morty was the one who ended up killing this assassin, or maybe it's just how gentlemanly he was to a new potential client. Unity. Throughout the run of the series, we've had the chance to witness some interesting relationships, particularly ones where humans had to go through bizarre conditions. But the one that peaks those lists is that of Unity, a hive-minded entity that has the capability of controlling the minds and bodies of a large number of hosts and thus converting them into extensions of itself. What happens to these beings? Well, Unity overrides their wills, but manages to retain their skills and memories for later use. That might just sound like one of those Doctor Who villain descriptions, but what's really more interesting is that Unity and Rick have a long romantic history. Yeah, crazy minds working together, and believe me, there's every reason to fear how crazy things could get. Unlike most beings who try to bring Rick to his senses and control his wild party persona that gets unleashed due to his inability to deal with the sadness inside him, Unity actually triggers his hedonistic impulses and turns him into a being who's more into reckless abandon. But Unity is not the one responsible for this, as she becomes aware herself that being with Rick might just be the worst thing that she can do to the very stability that she's trying to maintain all the time. Apart from being a parasite that can end up taking over an entire planet, Unity is also someone who reminds Rick about the trouble he could bring because of his inherent sadness.
Welcome to your nightmare, bitch!
Scary Terry. You thought Inception was cool. Well, look out for Rick and Morty, because they managed to bring Inception and Nightmare on Elm Street together, and also landed a cool character out of it with a Jesse Pinkman-esque Freddy Krueger who can't stop saying bitch. Scary Terry. Rick and Morty come across this individual during a visit to a layered dreamscape, and it's here that we get a lot of Freddy Krueger memories, including a random kid frolicking around. Once Rick and Morty end up tapping into Terry's dreams, it turns out that there's a lot for him to unpack about himself, and thus Rick and Morty end up helping out with his performance anxiety. Therefore, they make him a more professional dream killer, a help that does come in handy, allowing the person under stress from inside the monster to come out. So yeah, inside that monster that haunts your dreams, there's just some kid who got bullied in school. And once you give him a tight hug, there's a chance that you might end up helping him out. But what's really worth noting is that you can't really forget the number of annoying times this character drops the bitch slur.
The Truman Cocaine Lounge, the McKinley Hooker Dump, and the Lincoln Slave Coliseum. He did.
President Andre Curtis. Anything Keith David voices is absolutely gonna be iconic, and Wes Archer and Tom Kaufman managed to give him the best character with the stand-in for Obama in the animated series President Andre Curtis. You'd think the president of one of the most powerful countries in the world would actually have some strong persona, but Rick's presence ensures that even he turns out to be a bit of a bitch at times. The show perfectly manages to balance a presidential persona along with a satirical take on the entire spectacle, hinting at everything from a lack of proper tech to bureaucratic incompetence. While the animated series manages to steer away from direct political jokes, apart from the usual jabs from Rick, Curtis becomes the perfect window into all the desperation that exists for such an authority figure. Even though the rivalry between Rick and Curtis causes major fights between them, there's a certain bond where they return each other's favors. However, we know for sure that it's President Curtis who asks for Rick's help when the world is facing some major threats. President Curtis is probably among the most significant recurring characters in the series, and it seems that Justin Roiland realized the potential of the character and has now decided to make a spin-off series dedicated entirely to him. The show will be co-created by Dan Harmon and James Siciliano, and it'll tap into other interdimensional arcs and paranormal crises that might not always be linked to the main series. Let's hope they keep the tone similar and don't lean into the political turmoil the country is facing instead.
Treaty betwixt land and sea. Now face the wrath of your once and eternal...
Mr. Nimbus. If you think Aquaman is gay and feel some kind of hatred for the fish powers, then Mr. Nimbus might be able to convince you otherwise. While there might be some wild rumors about what Aquaman does to fish, Mr. Nimbus is a completely different level of eyes wide shut thing happening. The king of the ocean and Atlantis makes a random appearance in the series as an enemy of Rick's from long ago, someone Rick really finds annoying. But this annoyance could be something on a wholly different level, since the character might be someone who's had a long relationship with Rick. In fact, he calls Rick by the name Richard, which indicates a deeper bond, and there was something to do with Diane too. The best element of the story is that while Mr. Nimbus has every reason to be just a gag, the dude is actually a serious nemesis, so much so that he ensures Rick doesn't have to deal with any other villains apart from him. In terms of power, the man is all about sex, and apart from controlling the ocean and other water bodies, he can make people do things with the thrust of his hips. Mr. Nimbus might have had just a random appearance, but he won't be forgotten, considering the severe satirization the character offers of the Ocean Kings from both Marvel and DC.
Against the Federation!
L'chaim!
Tammy, what are you doing?
Sit your bird!
Tammy Gueterman. Tammy Gueterman might have been one of the biggest examples of the creators knowing what they were doing with the characters in the series. The character was introduced as one of Summer's school friends, who appeared to be completely harmless, apart from the usual teenager tropes that were supposed to be for laughs. It turns out she arrived at the party at Morty's house to infiltrate Rick's circle, particularly to steal Bird Person's heart and make their wedding the perfect place for getting Rick's entire gang apprehended. You thought that things were being rushed, but the next time we hear from Tammy or Bird Person, they were getting hitched, and it was all part of the larger plan. Tammy manages to show strategic ruthlessness, turning into a recurring villain after she essentially turns Bird Person into an android, resurrecting him from the dead and making him into a Rick killer. Her betrayal came as an absolute shocker, and the impact of this move resonated throughout the series. It was only here that Rick felt like giving up forever for the first time. Tammy managed to scar Rick's trust permanently, and ever since then, Rick's had multiple storylines linked to this incident.
Not anymore.
God damn.
We already did this.
Oh, is this a...
Storylord. Among the many things that Justin Roiland was trying to satirize in the series, it eventually came to him, and Roiland managed to do that. Storylord and his train are a take on the way Dan Harmon works on his stories, with each part or compartment representing a certain part of the story. So, in a way, he's talking about himself. Still, the story ends up being meta enough to strike a lot of things off instead of just being a meta reference. Storylord also represents the tendency of such stories and concepts to often end up having an exploitative and manipulated arc that feels forced. Storylord's existence proves that Rick and Morty might just have a formula underneath all that randomness, and it becomes more prominent. The second time we got to see Storylord, he'd managed to escape into meta-reality and then manipulate motivation after siphoning every bit of willpower from everyone. Thankfully, Rick and Morty managed to stop him from turning them into entertainment fuel. Was that supposed to mean a battle between Justin Roiland and the various studios trying to make something else out of his beloved animated series? Yeah, Storylord is probably one of the biggest meta characters ever created in the world of Rick and Morty. And that's an achievement if you know the series well enough. The Pope. Another interesting attempt at satire comes through the concept of the Pope, who appears as one of the one-off villains that somehow has an absurd level of power, putting him above the list of such villains. The Pope had been using Bigfoot as a means of eliminating his enemies, and eventually he managed to attain energy from Valhalla to become very powerful. Now, there are gonna be things said here that might sound like sentences you've heard for the first time. To defeat the Pope, after he'd managed to kill Rick, Morty, and Bigfoot quite a few times, Rick captures him inside what might be a take on the Pokeball. In the end, we see that Rick plays with him during an underground Pokemon battle, while Rick's clone had taken the papacy. The fact that Pope has supernatural powers is enough to generate significant interest in this character, and even though he was a one-time appearance, he did manage to become a memorable one.
Now you see my true form.
Reggie. If you think Reggie sounds like someone from your hood, then it might be interesting to know that he's the father of the kids, along with Rick's ex-lover, Gaia. By the way, Gaia didn't have a strong appearance, but the character was a take on Marvel's Ego. Anyway, Rick spent an entire vacation with his family to help the civilization on Gaia, only to find that it was Reggie who had planted the seed and not him. In the end, Reggie and Rick battle it out, a battle that doesn't fare well for Rick, because Reggie was more like a celestial being with godlike abilities and not the regular kind of cosmic threat. Once again, this huge character is killed off by accident when Summer and Morty accidentally drive a spaceship through his skull. Reggie gave off a one-dimensional persona of a god who considered everyone else around him inferior, and it didn't really help him much. Rhett Caan. No, there's nothing to do with James Caan or some other Caan, because this Caan is basically his name, Rhett Caan. In a series filled with a variety of ways to change the narrative through just one reference, Rhett Caan is someone who can alter the, has always been the case, aspect of things and narratives. Oh, he manages to cause some serious damage once Rick lets him out, and that ends up coming off as very funny. Again, Rhett Caan might be one of the coolest ironic names in the series.
This representation displeases me.
Goddess Beth. When Jerry and Beth go for therapy in order to work things out in their marriage, we get to see their mythic constructions of each other based on the way they idealize one another. While Beth's version of Jerry ends up being a rather slimy creature, Jerry's take on Beth is far more in control and literally looks like a goddess. In fact, later, when the slimy version of Jerry frees her, she manages to cause quite significant damage, ultimately going after everything that was holding her back. So yeah, the satire has seeped into the men and women of the series itself, and it's interesting to see how the characters satirize one another based on how they depict their love. We don't really know the full fate of Goddess Beth, but the fact that this being is out there in the multiverse means there's something a lot bigger than Beth and Space Beth out there.
Oh, great. Who invited Abradolf Lincler?
Abradolf Lincler. Yeah, this one just appeared, and it was almost as if Rick had been going through one of his drunk phases when he created this individual. A darkly bizarre creation. Lincler is the DNA of Adolf Hitler combined with that of Abraham Lincoln to create what one might call a morally neutral super leader. It somewhat makes sense to a point, but then the result was a complete twist, producing a conflicted and unstable being, someone constantly at war with himself. Yep, he was the same person straddling between the polar extremes of two of the most prominent historical figures. Even though Lincler has a short appearance in the series, he feels like the kind of character a writer might create as an experiment. While there could have been various directions for this character to go, he dies in the very episode he appears in, sacrificing himself and proving there was some sanity in the chaos of the character. So yeah, while the character might sound like a joke, he's more of a tragedy.
Always been the case. I'll free you remotely with this.
What is my purpose?
To wait until I tell you to pull.
Purpose Robot. Even though this one might not be a strong contender in this list, the Purpose Robot has proven to be a joke that sticks the landing every time Rick brings it up. Created during the earlier episodes of Season 1, it seems like Rick gave too much intelligence to a robot that was primarily supposed to just pass the butter. Yeah, he literally made a robot that can pass the butter. And while that might feel like the simplest purpose, this bot quickly realized that its purpose was too simple to even matter. I wonder if Purpose Robot should consider stand-up, because his one-liners are enough to bring plenty of laughs. The last time we saw him, Rick pulled him out to flip the lever and free Rhett Caan. As if there wasn't already enough comedy chaos happening, the Purpose Bot said, "You're fucking kidding me." If you think this robot is here just for the sake of delivering that joke, well, you should have paid attention when Rick responded with, "Yeah, welcome to the club, pal." The Purpose Bot might just be an example of the human condition, the tendency of beings to seek out the purpose and always look for something larger. In a way, the Purpose Robot might be going through a profoundly anxious scenario. Marvelous verdict. I personally love the concept of the Purpose Bot. It almost feels like a character that remained unfinished forever, referencing the various times something is introduced in a narrative but never properly utilized. If each character in this series were studied, it'd probably become a masterclass in writing such episodes. Even solar opposites managed to pick up on these tropes and create a storyline where multiple arcs were unfolding simultaneously. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.